Picture this. The year is 1948. You return home from your factory job on a chilly November night in Clarksville, Tennessee. The end of World War II was 6 years ago, and a new military base was just built in your own hometown. And from what you know from President Truman, the country's goals was to contain the spread of communism. But of course, that is some thousands of miles away. You have no idea that the immense danger of nuclear war is located inside your own small town. You don't want your wife and children to live up in an atomic wasteland, do you? But the threat of nuclear war is real, and you want your country to do everything it can to protect you from the threat of nuclear war. So, let's dive into the dilemma of the right of the government to build military bases and the responsibility it has to protect its people despite the imminent danger of nuclear war. Before we get into the details of Clarksville Base, we need to talk about the importance of nuclear weapons, most notably the Manhattan Project. Now, the discovery of nuclear fission in 1938 by German scientists concerned America enough to create a committee that would carry out its plans to create an atom bomb. Carrying on to the height of World War II in 1942, one of the main research centers was located in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, among other numerous in the country. After the U.S. had developed their atomic weapons enough to drop on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they knew that creating more would be necessary for this foreseeable future. But they needed locations to disperse their atomic developments, to ensure that we would keep our weapons dispersed.
Construction on Clarksville Base started in 1947 and finished the following year, with the first weapons arriving in 1949. This was the second nuclear weapons storage facility in the country at the time and made transportation convenient because of how relatively close it was to the laboratory in Oak Ridge. The role of Clarksville Base was to hold and store the laboratory materials and parts that would later be transported to other key locations. The materials coming in and out were of course processed, but were also monitored while they were in the facilities. By whom, you may ask? Two committees that worked together in tandem with checked control over the oversight of transportation and development of nuclear weapons. The Armed Forces Special Weapons Project was controlled by the government, while the Atomic Energy Commission was run by the public. Even though I say run by the public, the commission's chairman was appointed by the president, and the rest was filled by scientists and public figures. To speak more about the importance of these two committees, here's retired Lieutenant Colonel and current Army historian John O'Brien.
There are the two entities that are controlling all aspects of nuclear weapons. On the civilian side is the Atomic Energy Commission, employees, and they vetted their own employees, and they had specific functions related to the control of nuclear weapons. And the other half of the program, the military part of it, was called the Special Weapons Project, which had been in World War II the famous Manhattan Project, and then military control over the deployment and use of the weapons. So the idea here is that the military by itself or the civilians by themselves cannot get a hold, physical control of an atomic weapon without both sides being completely involved. So the movement of weapons, they're in the 13 different facilities, of which Clarksville Base is one of the 13. At that installation, there are representatives from those two organizations that take care of the weapons, and an overlaying or overarching plan to be able to move them around. So the civilians have to move the weapons around in order to maintain quality control, upgrade to new weapons, change out components that need to be changed out every now and again, and all of that. So the courier system for moving atomic weapons between the 13 different sites and preparing them for deployment by the military is all civilian controlled.
As you can see, this is an A structure. That is because there is no pillboxes looking at the structure, because there was no nuclear or atomic weapons inside. It was strictly used for materials and supplies needed for those atomic weapons. Now, in the A structures, they had these pillboxes, as you can see here, and the Marines were in charge of these pillboxes to make sure that the Navy delivering their materials was done in a safe, orderly manner. Now, as you pan over to these A structures over here, you can tell that it is a lot bigger than the other one. That is because it stored those nuclear and atomic weapons. And over time, the atomic weapon number changed from 26 to 66 to 67 in 1952, with over 1,000 nuclear weapons in those igloos. Transportation of the nuclear weapons stopped right here on these train tracks, where they were then taken off onto trucks and then moved to those igloos that I was previously mentioned. Now, a lot of the soldiers were not informed about what was inside of these trains, and if they were, most of the time they were misled, and a lot of the boxes were filled with sand to kind of mislead any Russian spies or rats that were believed to be inside the system, to make sure that they weren't using that information and distributing it to somebody else. Actors of Clarksville base during that time was the operations building known as the Voice. Now, from the outside, it looks like a completely normal storage unit. It was actually one of the most important communication buildings among political and military figures. Now, in that building, they would make discussions and ask questions about where should we position ourselves next, and how many more bombs do we need to store in this facility. Stuff like that would keep on going until around the 1940s and the 1950s. One of the most intriguing decisions made by the operations building was to make these fake buildings over top of their A structures. They wanted to do this to diffuse the possibility of Russians spying on any of the storage units with their satellites. Yes, you heard me right, satellites. That wasn't even the closest that the Russians got to Clarksville base. It was heard that they had KGB units in Clarksville, not on base, but off base, during the time of the Cold War. Now, why would the Russians do this? The Russians knew how important Clarksville base was in storing and its communications. They knew that, if nuclear war was ever to go off, that Clarksville base would be one of the first places that they would bomb, and one of the first places that they would attack to deplete the U.S.'s forces and their storage. Now, since Clarksville base was on the Russians' list of the first places to attack if nuclear war actually existed, this leads us back to the conundrum of the government acting on its rights to build infrastructures to fulfill its responsibilities to protect its people despite the imminent danger that it may lead to in the future. The creation of the base was necessary to diffuse the possible Russian advantage over the United States in the Cold War, despite the dangers of citizens that come alongside living in proximity to the nuclear base.
Now, after gathering the information about Clarksville base and the looming threat of Russia looking over the city of Clarksville, it was the government's rights and responsibility to protect those citizens' rights of the city. Now, Clarksville base was not created only for the citizens of Clarksville, but it was also created for the citizens of the entire nation. Now, with the added protection of watchtowers with the fence, one being electrified, the Clarksville base was making sure that nobody was coming in and out being unchecked. With this, the Navy was also helping as well. They had fake igloos and fake buildings inside of the base to make sure that Russians were not really getting a look inside the base when we were distributing bombs. They also had programs in Clarksville and other cities as well in the 50s and 60s to really make the citizens understand where to go if a bomb ever transpired. All these preparations show that the government was acting on its right to protect the people and its responsibility to its citizens by creating this base to diffuse the threat of nuclear war.